I don't think I'll ever forget that day. There was no rain, no thunder, just a sky so clear it was unsettling, as if even the heavens wanted a front row seat to watch me get stabbed in the back by my own blood. They called it an emergency meeting. I called it a public execution. No verdict, no lawyer, just my father's furious glare, my mother's cold pen tapping on the table, and my brother's smirk, like he'd been waiting for this moment forever. I was only 23, barely 8 months out of Wharton. I'd just joined the family business, Lennox Enterprises, as a point of pride. My father called it a natural succession. My mother hugged me at my graduation party, tears in her eyes, saying, "You're the new hope of our legacy." And now, it was the same people dragging me in front of the executive board like I was trash they were ready to throw out. "How much do you think your mistake could have cost us?" my father hissed through clenched teeth, each word pounding into my skull. I stood there, my hands still trembling, not yet recovered from the shock. I wanted to explain, I really did, but before I could even open my mouth, Nathan, my brother, cut in, his voice light but laced with poison. "You practically gave away the West Coast distribution division for half its actual value. That's not a mistake. That's systematic stupidity." The room fell dead silence. The contract lay in front of me. The one I on a night jammed with 3 meetings and a merger proposal from a tech company in Texas had mistakenly drafted using Q2 data instead of the updated post-warehouse expansion numbers. I lifted my head, trying to stay calm. The error was caught before final submission. Nothing was signed. I corrected it in the master file, and the updated version is still on the internal server. My father didn't look at me. He turned to Mr. Calloway, the chief legal officer. "Is that a valid excuse?" Mr. Calloway hesitated. "Legally, there's been no damage, but from a risk management standpoint, Mr. Lennox, this kind of carelessness is a serious red flag." I exhaled sharply, like I'd just been punched in the gut. I'd been working nearly 75 hours a week since I'd joined. No vacations, no weekends, no parties. I poured myself into every plan, every document, trying to prove I deserved to lead. And now, everything had come down to one data error, a perfect excuse to push me out. My mother entered just as I thought someone might defend me, but she didn't hug me, didn't ask how I was. She just rested a hand on my father's shoulder and quietly said, "The board is waiting, you should wrap this up." My father finally turned to me, for the first time during the entire meeting. "You're suspended. Indefinitely. All access to internal systems will be revoked immediately. HR will follow up with an official notice after this meeting." I couldn't believe my ears. "I'm your daughter. Is this how you treat your own child?" He didn't answer right away, but his eyes looked at me like I was a stranger. "Exactly because you're my daughter, this hurts more." Nathan leaned on the table, arms crossed. "Come on, Alice. Call it an extended vacation. You're still young, still have chances. Didn't you always say you wanted to live away from the family for a while? In Seattle, right?" I snapped my head toward my mother. "Seattle? What about Seattle?" Her voice was disturbingly calm. "We arranged a junior analyst position at your Uncle Richard's firm. A fresh start in a place where no one knows what happened." I froze. No one had asked me, not once. "And if I say no?" my father snapped. "Then you'll get nothing. No financial support, no contacts, no logistical help. We cut you off." I laughed, a dry, cracked laugh. So this family is that easy to sever, like a contract that's just expired. They didn't respond. Not a single word. That night, I packed up my office in silence. No goodbyes. No one asked where I was going. I caught the last train out of New York, carrying a small suitcase, a blank mind, and a heart so shattered I didn't even know which direction I was heading. I didn't choose Seattle. I chose to disappear. But there was one thing I didn't know at the time. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a return the Lennox family would never forget. I don't remember how many stops the train made that night, only that when I got off at the final station in Boston, the sky was foggy and freezing cold, like the universe itself was warning me, this beginning won't be easy. I rented a tiny room in Beacon Hill, cramped, thin walls, hallway lights flickering like they were on their last breath, but at least there were no judgmental eyes from Nathan, no steel-toned voice from my father. 3 days later, I opened the laptop I hadn't dared touch since being kicked out of Lennox Enterprises. Inside was the infamous contract, the one they used to label me incompetent. My hands trembled as I opened the file, not out of fear, but fury. I needed to look straight at the mistake that had torn my life apart. But as my eyes scanned the data, I froze. Something wasn't right. I'm methodical. My formatting, line spacing, technical language, I always use the same template. But this contract, parts of it weren't mine at all. The technical appendix was shortened. The asset valuation section used Calibri instead of the Georgia font I always used. Section 4.3, something I had reviewed meticulously, now read vague and suspiciously muddled. I opened the external drive I used to save internal drafts, a file timestamped at 11:48 p.m. the night before, exactly when I had finalized the original version. And when I opened it, my heart stopped. Every word, every number, completely different from what the board had used to convict me. I leaned back, breath shallow. Someone had edited my contract, deliberately, skillfully, and worst of all, maybe they had planned this all along. I remembered Nathan's smile in the boardroom, the way he sat there, unbothered, smug, like someone who already knew exactly how the scene would unfold. Oh God, it was him. He did this. I buried my face in my hands, my body frozen. This wasn't just a mistake. I'd been framed. My phone buzzed. A message from a private number. It wasn't your fault, but you need to understand, in this family, being naive is a deadly sin. Deep. I stared at the screen. D? Who was that? Maybe I shouldn't have responded, but I was tired of being led around. Who was texting me? No reply, but just a few minutes later, an untitled email appeared in my old inbox. The internal email that should have already been locked. Attachment. System access log, night of April 14th. The exact day the contract was altered. I opened it, and when the line Nathan Lennox, senior admin, popped up with a timestamp exactly 23 minutes after I saved the original file, I nearly dry heaved with rage. There was no doubt now. He had accessed the system, taken my contract, altered it, and sent it out under my name. I slammed the laptop shut. My eyes burned, my throat was dry. Only one question remained. It took me a few days to piece everything together, and when the truth surfaced, it was filthier than I'd imagined. Nathan, the one who had always been our parents' favorite since we were kids, had been secretly collecting shares from subsidiary branches over the past 5 years, using shell companies, under the names of friends, lovers, even his personal assistant. He was plotting a full takeover, eliminating anyone who posed a threat to his rise. And me, with an honors degree from Wharton, with reform proposals that had once impressed the advisory board, was the biggest thorn in his side. His plan wasn't just to discredit me. He wanted me erased from the game entirely. I sat for hours in that rented room, head spinning. I had no power, no allies, no protection from my parents anymore. But I had one thing, the truth. And what I knew about Nathan, his manipulation, forgery, deceit, could be my sharpest weapon. I reopened the anonymous email, reading each line like a coded message. Naivety is a deadly sin. I smiled. No, I used to be naive. But now, I was awake. And him? The man who tossed me out of the company like garbage, he was going to pay. 3 days after discovering the altered contract, I got a phone call from an unknown number. A deep, raspy male voice came through after 2 rings. Alice, it's me. Don't hang up. I froze. My grandfather, Charles Lennox. The man I'd always seen as a legend, the man behind the Lennox Enterprises empire who had quietly stepped away from public life and now lived off the grid at a farm in rural Vermont. I thought he'd forgotten me, or worse, taken their side, but his voice, not angry, not disappointed, just calm, firm. You know now, don't you, about the contract? I clutched the phone, heart racing. It was Nathan, he edited it, and everyone knew and stayed silent. Not everyone stayed silent. He paused. I knew before it even happened. I stood, walked to the window, hands trembling with rage. Then why didn't you stop it? Why let me get cast out like some traitor? Because if I interfered, you'd forever be the Lennox girl, hiding under her grandfather's shadow. But if you got up on your own, if you saw the family for what it really is, you'd know who's who, and you'd be strong enough to reclaim what's yours. Silence. I couldn't argue. Deep down, I knew he was right. He sent me a secure email address and a password. When I logged in, I found an entire archive. Internal contracts, financial reports, leaked emails, all labeled training confidential for AL. I opened folder after folder. Each file came with notes written in his distinct tone. Q2 2016 report. Compare actual versus reported revenue. Pay attention to the Houston branch. Allenville acquisition strategy. How did Nathan hide the debt? Azalito port deal. Who actually profited? Each line, each note, cut into the glossy mask Lennox Enterprises had been hiding behind. I cried. Not out of anger, but because for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. From then on, we kept in touch regularly. No calls, no public meetings. Everything went through encrypted emails, hidden cloud accounts, or occasionally handwritten letters sent via special delivery, tucked inside seemingly innocent gifts. Once I received a box of French chocolates. Hidden beneath the lining was a scanned copy of bank documents, linked to a shell company Nathan used to siphon funds from the development fund. Another time, it was an old book marked at pages discussing supermajority veto rights. I started to understand he was training me, not for revenge, but for succession, the right way. Every month, we met once at a small cafe in Montpelier. He always arrived early, sitting by the window, reading the paper like any ordinary old man. But when I sat down, he'd set the paper aside and begin the lesson with a question. If you were Nathan, where would you hide the loss report? Why did your father double down on logistics while working capital declined? How do you think the board would react if they saw the full guarantee liabilities under Nathan's name? I answered each one. When I was wrong, he corrected me. When I was right, we dug deeper. Bit by bit, I came to see the tangled web my family had built, a system of power, deceit, and hollow prestige. One time, I asked him, why me? Wasn't I the weakest one in their eyes? He smiled, something fierce and tender shining in his eyes. Exactly, because you were the only one pushed out of the game. You can see the whole board. I was no longer the dreamy-eyed graduate. I began rebuilding my life, step by step, with only one weapon in hand: knowledge and clarity. Each week, I studied more corporate law, financial structures, negotiation tactics, even media strategy. No one knew I was preparing for a return. No one knew I was being guided by the only person who still had clarity in that chaos. We had a rule. Every time I achieved a milestone in our plan, he would send me a chess piece, each representing progress: a rook, a knight, a bishop. In the summer of year 3, I received a hand-carved ebony queen, exquisitely detailed. Attached was a small note. In business, just like in chess, the queen is the most versatile and dangerous piece. Don't let anyone think you're just a pawn to be sacrificed. I knew the time was near, and when it came, nothing would ever be the same again. 1 year after leaving New York, I registered my own company in Massachusetts. An unassuming name, a small office rented on the 3rd floor of an old building in South End, Boston. I called it Hawthorne Freight Strategies. A name bland enough to avoid attention, but for me, it held deep meaning: rebuilding from ruin. I started with just 3 employees: a meticulous accountant who had worked for a domestic freight firm in Maine, an operations expert fired for being a poor cultural fit, and a retired port manager with more steel in him than anyone else I'd met in the industry. We didn't have a fancy meeting room or venture capital backing. We had old desks, freight route maps plastered all over the walls, and an unshakable belief that we could do better than the people currently wrecking Lennox Enterprises. I began with small contracts, coordinating containers, optimizing transport routes for mid-sized factories. No one knew I was Alice Lennox. I signed everything under Alice H. Carter, using my mother's maiden name. Every night, I worked until 2 o'clock a.m. But unlike my time at Lennox, this time I knew every hour I put in had purpose, had value. I wasn't working to prove anything to anyone anymore. I was building something of my own. 3 years later, Hawthorne Freight was ranked among the top 20 private supply chain consulting firms on the East Coast. We expanded into Norfolk, Savannah, and eventually reached Seattle, the very place they once tried to exile me to. They didn't know that now I was the lead consultant for two of the largest seaports there. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Lennox Enterprises, and what I saw was a rapid decline. Nathan, parading around as the bold young CEO, kept launching flashy but hollow strategies, expanding into the Asian market without understanding tariff laws, acquiring startups only to discover they were drowning in debt, pouring money into AI without an in-house tech team to implement anything. I read the news, watched his interviews on Bloomberg and CNBC. Nathan still smiled, still made promises, still talked about a bright future. But I knew the system behind him was rotting. One early winter night, I received an email from my grandfather. No greeting, just one line. They just mortgaged the entire transport division for a short-term loan to fund the Baltic Connect deal. Guess which asset was incorrectly valued? I laughed. I didn't need long to figure it out. The Southeast Asia route, the one I knew better than anyone, the one where I'd quietly inserted a clause, back when I was still at Lennox. I opened my old files, scanning for clause 18.7b. In the event of a change in route ownership structure, operational priority shall belong to the party holding an independent certification for the related port infrastructure. I held that certification. 2 years prior, Hawthorne Freight had acquired a small logistics firm in Singapore. No one had noticed. But that was the key. And Nathan was now using that very route to secure a loan worth hundreds of millions. My grandfather followed up. Step by step, Alice, let them dig the hole deep enough. I started preparing, quietly, methodically. I restructured the company, changed the legal entity name, withdrew Hawthorne from public-facing deals, and transferred ownership to a new holding firm, Vantage Haven Group. Everything was lined up, ready for the moment I needed to strike. I didn't forget to bring in a legal team from DC, the same group of attorneys who once won a case against an international airline chain. I didn't need them in the ring just yet, but they would hold the sword when the battle began. Each night, I sat by the window on the 18th floor, looking out over the lights of Boston. I was no longer the girl thrown out of a boardroom. I was the one preparing to return, with knowledge, strategy, and an unrelenting will. Nathan might have the media, he might still have our parents' support, but I had time, data, and my grandfather. I remembered something he once said. Victory doesn't come from the loudest voice. It comes from the one who sets the board. And the board was ready. I still remembered the night I wrote that contract draft, the first version of the agreement transferring partial operation rights of the Pacific route to a Malaysian partner. That was around April, 3 years before I was kicked out of Lennox Enterprises. Back then, I'd only been on the job for less than 8 months, but I already saw the flaws in their strategy, focusing on vessels and ignoring the route itself. I fought with the legal team for a full week to include a small clause so minor no one bothered to care. It was tucked at the end of Section 7, hidden under Asset Infrastructure Conversion Conditions. I named it Clause 23.4b. Simple, concise, but crafted with surgical precision. In the event that ownership, operational, or routing structures are adjusted within the scope of maritime routes in the Asia-Pacific region, first priority shall be granted to the original contract signatory, provided they demonstrate independent operational capability at the time of restructuring. And the person who signed it was me. When I got kicked out, I'd forgotten about that clause, But my grandfather hadn't. During a short meeting at a rest stop off Interstate 89, he handed me a plastic sealed printout. Do you remember this clause? I skimmed it. One line, then two, and then my blood froze. God, they didn't delete it. No, because they didn't even know it existed. He smiled, the calm, knowing smile of a chess master who'd seen the checkmate long ago. That clause, the one they once called legally meaningless, was now the only key that could lock down Lennox Enterprises' entire funding plan for the Baltic Connect deal, which hinged on restructuring the Asia shipping route for collateral. And I, as the legal signatory, held veto power. I began moving, quietly, carefully. First, I acquired a small port operator in Taiwan, a former Mitsui Logistics branch that had filed bankruptcy 8 months earlier. Then a freight forwarding firm in Manila, the company name on the deals, Vantage Haven Pacific. Next, I hired an independent audit team from Australia, asked them to evaluate Vantage Haven's transport network capabilities. Their report concluded we could operate the Southeast Asia Pacific corridor with 12% higher efficiency than Lennox. I didn't send that report to anyone. I locked it away, filed next to the original contract and a handwritten letter from my grandfather, written in elegant cursive. You don't need to destroy everything. You just need to hold the right chain. And I had it. That August, Nathan held a major press conference, announcing expansion into the Singapore market. The maritime route I knew he was banking on as the final lifeline for Lennox's crumbling balance sheet. I watched live from my office. Nathan wore a gray suit, his hair slicked back, grinning. He spoke of a new era, a global logistics strategy overhaul. And me? I didn't smile. I tilted my head at the screen, silently repeating every word of Clause 23.4p, in the event that ownership or operational structure is adjusted. They were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. 3 days later, Lennox Enterprises sent an official memo to its Singapore partners, formally launching the restructuring process for the route. And just as I had expected, they completely overlooked the priority clause. Immediately, I submitted a formal complaint to the Regional Trade Court, citing Clause 23.4b, attaching proof of independent operations, and requesting a full suspension of all transactions until priority rights could be legally verified. That afternoon, Nathan called my grandfather. I knew because he messaged me. The boy just swore non-stop for 7 minutes. I think you better get ready for the shareholders meeting. I laughed. After years of silence, months of patience, the final blade had struck the exact weak spot. Lennox Enterprises stock dropped 4.6% in the first trading session after news broke that the court had ordered a freeze on the Asia-Pacific route restructuring. Investors began to ask questions. Partners grew confused. The once complacent internal audit board now showed real concern. And Nathan, the one who signed the Baltic Connect deal without reviewing the final legal clauses, was starting to feel the ground crumble beneath him. I knew my moment was approaching, but I wouldn't return as someone seeking revenge. I would return as someone who knew the rules and played them better. The call came on a freezing Monday morning. The name flashing on my screen was one I was never ready to see. Dr. M. Jansen, Vermont General Hospital. I had known, but that didn't stop my heart from twisting as the doctor said, Charles Lennox passed away. Stroke at 4:12 IEM. Quick, painless. I hung up without saying a word. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly quiet. For 10 years, he had been the only one who believed in me, taught me, and guided me through every hidden move my family tried to bury. Without him, I would have disappeared from the business world, or worse, become a trembling shadow of myself. I wore black, drove to Vermont, and stood at the back of the church during the funeral. My mother sat in the front row, eyes wet but expression empty. My father nodded politely to guests like a politician working a crowd. And Nathan, he stood beside the casket, fists clenched, eyes not in grief but in fear. He knew, he had to know, the will wouldn't end well for him. I didn't greet anyone. Didn't hug anyone, didn't fake sorrow. I just bowed one final time to my grandfather, then walked straight to the office of James Caldwell, the lawyer my grandfather had trusted for over 4 decades. The will reading took place in the 17th floor conference room at Caldwell and Associates, Boston. I arrived early, wore a dark gray suit, hair neatly tied back, no jewelry, no perfume. Silence was my best armor now. When the door opened, the entire Lennox family walked in as if they still ran the show. My mother gave a slight nod. My father glanced at me, expressionless. Nathan came in last, eyes locked on me, like he was trying to read every breath I took. Attorney Caldwell began. Per the wishes of Mr. Charles Lennox, all direct family members and personal shareholders with inheritance rights are required to attend in person. No proxies, no absences. All proceedings will be recorded and archived in accordance with the law. No one spoke. He opened the gold envelope, pulled out the notarized, triple-stamped will. His voice was steady, emotionless. I, Charles Lennox, being of sound mind and body, declare the following. The first part included small gifts to housekeepers, a former driver, and a few charities. My mother was granted a vintage 1950s jewelry collection. My father received a modest trust as acknowledgement of his early contributions. Nathan raised an eyebrow when his name hadn't yet been mentioned. Caldwell paused, then opened another folder, eyes now fixed on Nathan. Regarding Lennox Enterprises, the family's primary asset. The air in the room dropped. The entire 53% controlling stake owned by Mr. Charles Lennox, including voting rights on the board, executive appointment authority, and merger veto power, shall be fully transferred to his granddaughter, Alice Lennox, effective immediately. My mother's jaw dropped, my father froze, Nathan's face turned ghost white, his hand gripping the armrest like he might snap it. This can't be, he muttered, nearly shouting. She was fired. She's no longer part of the company. Attorney Caldwell didn't blink. Not finished reading. He pulled out one more file, a copy of the altered contract from 10 years ago, along with the original copy preserved by Alice, and a forensic numerical report verified by a third-party agency. According to authorized investigation on April 14 of that year, the original contract file was accessed and modified using a senior admin account, username n.lennox@lennoxint.com. The intent was to discredit Alice Lennox. Murmurs rippled through the attending board members. I sat still, no smile, no words. The board at the time was manipulated with falsified evidence to terminate Miss Alice. Caldwell's tone turned icy. That decision, from this moment forward, is null and void. Nathan exploded. I'm the CEO. I was officially appointed by the board. She has no authority. You were acting CEO, I said, rising to my feet, hand resting gently on the table, appointed under conditions that assumed the will had not yet been disclosed. Those conditions no longer apply. I looked around the room, the same room where, 10 years ago, they stripped me of my dignity, my job, and even my name. I'm not here to beg for my position. I'm here to claim what was always mine. Attorney Caldwell concluded the reading with a handwritten letter from my grandfather. Alice, if you're reading this, it means you've grown strong enough to walk into the real battlefield. You don't need revenge. Just stand firm, do what's right, and let the truth speak for itself. This empire was once built on integrity. Now it's time to bring that back. I nodded. No more words were necessary. That afternoon, I walked out of Caldwell's building with official executive authority, full control, and a public battle I had spent the past decade preparing for. And Lennox Enterprises, the name that once cast me aside, was now in the hands of the very woman they once called a failure. 2 weeks after the will was read, I stepped into Lennox Enterprises headquarters for the first time in 10 years. No longer a young girl clutching files, heart racing in fear. Today, I was the one in charge. The new nameplate had been mounted on the boardroom door. Alice Lennox, chairwoman and CEO. I called for an emergency meeting with the entire executive team, major shareholders, and the internal audit department. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the room was packed, the atmosphere tight as a wire. All eyes were on me, the one they once called a failure, a liability, a stain on the family name. I stood and opened a thick folder. I won't start with pleasantries. We're not here for small talk. We're here to expose the truth. I projected the last 3 years of internal reports onto the screen. Every number, every questionable expense, every irrational investment, all authorized by Nathan Lennox. This is the deal with Van Trex Tech, resulting in a $9,200,000 0 cents loss because Nathan bypassed risk assessment. This is the short-term loan from Quasar Capital with an interest rate of 18% used to fund a vague PR campaign. And this is the secret sponsorship agreement for the Asian CEO Conference Series, where Nathan used company funds to fly first class, stay at 5-star resorts, and brought back 0 contracts. Each piece of evidence landed like a knife to the image Nathan had spent the last 10 years carefully building. I turned toward the far end of the table where he sat, face pale, sweat collecting at the back of his neck. And finally, I pulled out a sealed confidential file, the Baltic Connect contract, where Nathan mortgaged the company's entire infrastructure, assets including the Pacific shipping route, to secure a $220 million 0 cents loan, without verifying legal validity. I paused, staring at him. Clause 23.4b suspended that deal, crashed our stock price, and cost Lennox nearly $58 million 0 cents in a single week. The boardroom erupted into murmurs, phones buzzed nonstop. An elderly shareholder in the corner snapped, "How long has he been hiding this?" Another voice, "I invested in Lennox because I believed in the long-term strategy. Turns out it was just smoke and mirrors?" Nathan shot up. "You set this up. You and Grandpa. You trapped me." I gave a faint smile. "I didn't trap you, Nathan. You walked into the trap yourself. I simply pulled back the cover so everyone could see where you're standing." The board called for an immediate vote. Result: 98% in favor of removing Nathan from all positions. Lennox stock rebounded slightly as the news hit. The press called it one of the fastest executive collapses in family business history. Nathan tried to countersue. He hired lawyers and claimed I had seized the company through a manipulated will. The lawsuit didn't last a month before being dismissed entirely, after legal experts confirmed the legality, validity, and authentication of every document my grandfather left behind. Nathan's legal fees? Paid out of his own pocket. His Manhattan penthouse was foreclosed due to mortgage default, and he, the golden son of the Lennox family, walked out of headquarters alone, unescorted, in silence. A few days later, I received a message from my mother. "Honey, maybe we could talk. After all, we're still family." Then an email from my father, inviting me to a casual dinner to reconnect. I didn't reply, not out of hatred, but because I no longer had room for lies dressed in sweet words. A week later, they appeared outside my office, holding flowers and forced smiles. I stepped out, looked them in the eyes. "Dad, Mom, I didn't take back the company. I simply reclaimed what was mine from the beginning, what Grandpa entrusted to me, not what this family tried to steal." My mother's eyes welled up, my father lowered his head. But I didn't flinch. If you truly want a fresh start, begin by acknowledging what you've done, not with cheap apologies, but through action, by letting go of status, of control. They said nothing more, and I didn't need them to. I turned away, the glass doors closed behind me, and I felt lighter than ever. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who doesn't turn away when you're at your weakest. I could forgive, but I wouldn't go back, because I had a future to build. The first morning in my new office, the one that once belonged to my grandfather, there were no applause, no champagne, no welcome banners. Only me, pale sunlight filtering through UV-coated glass, and a city moving forward. Regardless of who ran Lennox Enterprises, I placed my hand on the polished mahogany desk where Grandpa once signed contracts that reshaped American logistics. Beside his favorite Mont Blanc fountain pen, a small glass frame sat. Inside was the original contract, the one that contained Clause 23.4b, the very clause once dismissed as a stain on the family, that later became the blow that brought me back. I sat down, slowly turning once in the leather chair, feeling each creak beneath my back. Not out of pride, but because I had finally returned to the place that should have been mine all along. The laptop on my desk lit up. An email appeared. No sender, no subject, only one line. The Queen has taken her throne. Checkmate, my dear CMO. I didn't need anyone to explain. I knew. Grandpa had programmed the message to send only when everything was complete. I placed my hand on the screen. No tears. I had cried enough for a lifetime. Now, I only felt peace. I stood and walked to the window. All of Boston stretched out before me, the financial towers, the subway lines, the ports where the first Lennox containers were unloaded from Grandpa's original vessel in 1972. I thought about everything that had led here. The sudden fall, the damp motel room in Beacon Hill, the nights writing business plans until sunrise just to win a tiny contract, the secret lessons with Grandpa, where I learned to see the world through the eyes of a game maker, not a piece trapped by the rules. I returned to my desk and opened the right-hand drawer. Inside was the Lennox Enterprises Strategic Development Plan for 2024-2034, something I had drafted 3 years ago, back when Nathan didn't even realize he was slowly wrecking the company. On the first page was a quote from my grandfather. "No one is born to be a king, but anyone can learn to lead." I took a deep breath, then hit the button to start a video call with the strategy department. "We begin now. Cancel the entire Baltic Connect project. Cut the losses immediately. Transfer full asset control in Singapore back to headquarters, and reconnect with all legacy partners Nathan abandoned. I want meetings with them this week." One of the sales directors asked hesitantly, "You want to start everything over? Won't we be seen as surrendering?" I looked up, my voice steady and unwavering. "I'm not surrendering. I'm wiping out a failed man's strategy and rebuilding an empire." The meeting continued. With every second I spoke, I saw the shift in their eyes. No more doubt, no more resistance, just belief, finally. That afternoon, I walked alone along the harbor where my grandfather once took me when I was 9. Back then, he pointed to a cargo ship departing the dock and said, "Do you know what that ship is carrying?" I guessed cargo. He laughed. "No, it's carrying trust. Every contract signed is a promise, and a company is only strong when it keeps its word." I hadn't fully understood what he meant until today. Later that night, with the city lights flickering on, I returned to the office alone. I placed the original contract back on its display stand, then scribbled a note and stuck it to the inside of the glass frame. "Never let anyone else define who you are, even if they share your last name." I knew storms lay ahead, dissenters, people who would never accept me as their leader, but this time, I wasn't alone. I had my team, a clear strategy, a solid foundation, and most importantly, a resilience forged by the very cruelty my own family had once hurled at me. No one is born ready to sit in a seat of power, but those who are steadfast enough, wise enough, and tough enough to survive it will become leaders. I picked up my phone, opened the selfie camera. Staring back at me was the face of a woman who had walked through hell and still had calm in her eyes. I took the photo. Then I sent it to the internal company mailing list with one subject line: Lennox Enterprises, reborn, starting today. Alice's story didn't end with revenge. It began with a new era, where strength was built on knowledge and justice was rewritten by the very hands of the one most deeply hurt. And just like her grandfather once said, checkmate, the game was over, and the Queen had taken her throne. Alice's journey is proof that sometimes betrayal and pain can become the spark for something extraordinary. Betrayed and dismissed by her family, she didn't break, she quietly rebuilt from nothing. Knowledge, persistence, and integrity helped her reclaim what was rightfully hers. In a world filled with deceit and power struggles, Alice showed that the true winner isn't the fastest to power, but the one who knows exactly when to rise with clarity and purpose. What do you think about Alice's journey? What would you do in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more intense and emotional family stories coming soon.